the left is all over this one talking point. It's like somebody issued it, right? And this is what they do in the business. They issue literally every single day talking points. They come from the White House, and then the left parrots them. Boop, ba-doop, ba-doop, ba-doop. Over and over again. And that's why you see everybody saying the exact same thing on one side of the aisle. I think this totally, like, I couldn't even remember her name. I was actually writing the rundown this morning, and I'm like, she's on at 4:00 on MSNBC. She's this like stringy, dirty blonde hair. What is her name? It took me a good 5 minutes, and I am not. I am not Joe Biden. Anyway, you tell me if you remember her name. Drew fortunately did. Anyway, let's go and see this clip from MSNBC with this anchor who's so worried that she's going to lose her job.
I've seen that toast a bunch of times, but it landed very differently this year because depending on what happens in November, 7 months from right now, this time next year, I might not be sitting here. There might not be a White House Correspondents' Dinner or a free press. While our democracy doesn't exactly fall apart immediately without it, the real threat looms larger. A candidate with outward disdain, not just for a free press, but for all of our freedoms and for the rule of law.
I have one piece of advice. Voice lessons. I kept saying, was she about to cry? I mean, she certainly looked like she was about to cry. And then I realized, oh no, that's just the vocal fry. For some reason, all the women on the left, maybe other than Rachel Maddow, she's got that going for her. I mean, maybe that's it. Although I do think she's gifted in how she manipulates storylines. I mean, there's a certain craft there. You just don't come up with that stuff out of thin air, right? That takes talent. Talent, ladies and gentlemen. But that one, my goodness, she needs some voice lessons because there is a vocal fry going on. And I say this, by the way, as a former classically trained singer. That's my piece of advice to help the poor girl out. Anyway, she thinks she's going to get dumped. She may, just because I don't know how her ratings are. But then this one who's already been dumped, I think Kennedy has a nickname for him. What is it? Humpty Dumpty? I said Potato Head the other day and you guys corrected me. See, I can't even remember their nicknames. I watch these people so you don't have to. Anyway, here's Brian Stelter is his name on CNN talking about how he's worried about all the lockups that are going to happen.
It's valuable to think ahead to what may happen in a second Trump term. This is frankly speculative nonfiction because we use the words that Trump and his allies have said and we use them to talk about the future. Jail, of course, is the extreme part of the spectrum. Imprisonment is an extreme part. But think about IRS audits. Think about government pressure on media companies. Think about other forms of government interference. There are a lot of pressure points. And frankly, Rachel Maddow is not the only member of the media thinking about this. I've talked to the heads of news organizations, CEOs of media companies that are thinking through, not in dramatic fashion, not because they're afraid of going to jail, but because they want to know what could Trump do to use his power in a second term to punish the media.
And it's also now a real question whether...
Again, I go back to what we've seen, right? Let's try and be realists, living in reality for just a split second here. We had 4 years of Trump, we had 8 years of Obama, and we've had nearly 4 years of Biden. How many journalists actually wound up in deep water with Trump versus Biden versus Obama, right? How many journalists were spied upon in the Obama regime, dare I say, which seems to still exist today, and that continues now under Joe Biden. So I think it's pretty darn clear where the fault lies on that part. And, maybe you guys, that's your book, right? You get it because that's your game. But Trump just actually, unfortunately for him, is so upfront about who he likes and doesn't like that he just calls you out to your face. I mean, that doesn't happen with Biden. It doesn't happen with Obama. I'll never forget the first time I ever interviewed Obama. I was covering him when he was on the campaign trail, when he was first running. And I was there. It was kind of a gaggle, if you would. And I muscled my way to the front and I threw a mic in his face and I asked him some question. Oh my gosh. I had one of his handlers come over and grab my elbow and threaten me and say, you know what? You're never going to get an interview with him again because you did that. I mean, wow. Like the difference, I think about the difference, Trump's team, they'd be like, can you interview him again? Like he just loved talking to reporters, right? Whereas, very different, very, very different story over there in Obama land, very different story in Biden land, where they're drinking the Kool-Aid. And we're going to talk about that because, whatever you think is going on is not really going on. The economy's great. The economy's not bad. There's no inflation. He's reduced inflation rather than took it forward to 9.4% and counting. It's cumulative, you see, Joe and team. I realize your economic team has a degree in music and social work, but an economist would help explain the cumulative effect of inflation. Before I get to some of these other view references, speaking of inflation, I just want to give a shout out to our good friends over at American Heart for Gold. One of the diversification strategies that comes in handy these days and certainly has proven well, certainly over the last couple of years, has been an investment in gold. You can get up to $15,000, by the way, in free silver if you text 655-32 with my name. Text Trish to 65532 or call them at 1-844-495-1115. Again, up to $15,000 worth of free silver for friends of this show, for friends of mine, friends of Trish. So you can name drop in this case, or you can go to Trish Loves Gold. I know you can't forget that URL, right? TrishLovesGold.com. We're so happy to partner with these guys, and we appreciate all their support, helping to make this show possible. And what I'm excited about is silver's been on a tear too, so this could be a really good thing. Go check it out. Try and get your up to $15,000 worth of free silver by texting Trish to 65532. So yeah, Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, they have this theory that somehow they're all going to go to jail or get sent away if Donald Trump becomes the president, rather than just coming to the realization that Disney's not going to be able to afford them anymore, and they are selling ABC. And when they sell ABC and ABC News, whoever comes in to buy them is just not going to pay the salaries. But that's not stopping Whoopi Goldberg, who has this, really crazy theory. You got to give her some credit, right? She came up with it before Rachel Maddow did about how they're going to go after everyone. Watch out.
I'm going to be, on day one, I'm going to be a dictator. Who says it to you, tells you, I'm going to put you people away. I'm going to take all the journalists, I'm going to take all the gay folks, I'm going to move you all around and disappear you. If that's the country you want, you know who to vote for. Well, if that's not the country you want, you have to make a decision.
Oh boy. Lovely crowd you got over there. And they're actually feeding this narrative to the American public every single day. Now, again, their ratings are not great. I'm pretty darn sure that Fox beats them every day with the show. I used to be on it a lot with the women outnumbered. One guy and all the women. Clever. Anyway, it tends to beat The View in ratings. And so if cable's beating network, and you have all the overhead of network, then yeah, that's going to be short-lived. So I do suspect that they will lose their jobs at some point, but it will have nothing to do with Donald Trump. That's not going to stop them, though, from creating a good storyline. That's exactly what's going on. It's a big, giant story. Nobody's living in reality, including Fauci. Anthony Fauci went on The View today and seemed to have amnesia, full-on amnesia, ladies and gentlemen, along with Joy Behar, who also had a very bad case of amnesia. Because somehow, well, before I show you just exactly how bad the amnesia is, and that would be, Joy Behar totally forgetting about how Anthony Fauci said anything about masks, anything at all. I was certainly surprised by the fawning, if you would, by Whoopi Goldberg. I mean, she just couldn't say enough great stuff about this guy. What a classy dude he was. How great he was. How we all owe our lives to him. I will say this, in terms of 2020, you know what? Lots of mistakes were made, ladies and gentlemen. Lots and lots and lots of mistakes. And we unnecessarily lost people because of these mistakes. I mean, think about all the people that were sent into nursing homes with COVID in the state of New York. So while we were closing down schools and closing down shops and restaurants and society as you knew it, guess what? Andrew Cuomo, was sending people with COVID into nursing homes, exposing the most vulnerable elderly people to the virus, while simultaneously shutting down the schools. So, the kids don't get to go to school. Teachers union is happy. And yet, look what really transpired. And Anthony Fauci didn't do a darn thing about that, ladies and gentlemen. No. Anthony Fauci actually lied to us. Do you remember when he told John LaPook over on CBS News' 60 Minutes that you didn't need a mask? I mean, that is seared in my memory, because eventually we had Anthony Fauci telling us not only did you need one mask, but two might come in handy. They've totally forgotten that on The View. That's the whole amnesia thing going on. We're going to show you that clip momentarily. Drew's going to signal to me when he's ready to show it to you, as well as when, Whoopi was just over the moon, rolling out the red carpet. For goodness sakes, girl. I mean, it's kind of nauseating. It's nauseating to see this. But this is exactly what went down. And it happened today on today's edition of The View. And I'm going to show you both of these. But I want to first tell you one important story. I was talking with somebody who works in the healthcare industry recently. And she was a nurse in the Brooklyn section of New York. And there was a young woman that came in February of 2020. And she had just come back from Italy. Her father was with her in his late 60s, and he went into the hospital with his daughter. She was there because she wanted a COVID test. And the nurse looked at her and said, "You just came back from Italy?" And she volunteered this little factoid. "Yep, and my 3 roommates are all in the hospital in Italy with COVID. And I feel really stuffed up, and I'm really having a hard time breathing, and this, that, and the other." And she had a high fever, etc. So she had all the symptoms, if you would, of somebody who had COVID. And this nurse wanted to give her a test. But at that time, the NIH was controlling every single test, and they only had so many tests, and it was a big, big deal when you gave out the tests. And you had to apparently call the NIH, and you had to get somebody to sign off on the actual test itself, a bureaucrat who knew nothing and was just checking a bunch of boxes. So she said to the young woman, "Give me a second. I'm going to go call the NIH." She calls the NIH, and the NIH said, "No, she can't get a test." And the nurse is like, "But wait a second, she's coming from Italy, for goodness sakes. And 3 of her roommates are all in the hospital with this. And she was just on a plane, exposing all those people, exposing her father, who was in a demographic that could be badly affected." And the NIH said, "No, we are only testing people that are coming from Asia right now." Wow, right? That is government gone wild. That is government on steroids. That is wrong. That is bureaucracy squared. Bureaucracy squared. And so when you watch The View, and we're going to show you this, when you watch The View and you see them do this layup, "Oh my gosh, Fauci, we love you, we love you, we love you." Think about what Fauci was doing. The control he had on everything. The refusal to bring any psychologists into the room. The refusal to bring any economists into the room. As I've said all along, you need a strong economy to fight that thing. What did they do? Oh, they printed money. They gave everybody money. They printed and printed some more. That was the solution. Closing down the economy. By the way, there are businesses that have never recovered from that. And then there are businesses that figured out that PPP program a little all too well, right? And benefited extraordinarily so. And you think about the population in America, what they were able to do with all their PPP money and all their checks that they were getting. 1, 2, 3. Biden brought in the 3rd stimulus check, even though we were kind of coming to the end of the cycle and we didn't really need that. And the economists were warning, even Larry Summers. I mean, I was sitting here pounding the table. No. I mean, I did that even with Trump and his 2nd stimulus check. I said, "You're going to get inflation, guys. You're going to get massive, massive, massive inflation." And sure enough, what do we get? Larry Summers, the former head of the NEC and also the former Treasury Secretary under Clinton, he was really smart on this. He was one of the few liberals that was willing to call it for what it was worth. I mean, he did so after me, but hey. Well, I'll still give credit where credit is due. And he said, you know what, this is going to be like Cape Cod in the summer or Paris in August. Once we come back, we're going to come rip-roaring back. So you got to be careful about how much stimulus you're going to put out there in the meantime, because all that stimulus is going to do is create more inflation. And more inflation is going to lead you into an economic quagmire from which you're not going to be able to easily recover. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, today. What are we looking at? Upwards of 30% of an increase in eggs, upwards of 30% overall in grocery costs. Wages are up 17%, maybe a little less. Maybe it's actually more like 15%. And I would argue if you look at these numbers on an apples to apples basis, then you're going to find out. Drew, you're going to let me know when you have that sound, right? You're going to find out exactly what they have done to this economy. And it ain't pretty. And you're not going to be able to recover this anytime soon. Frankly, I mean, it's not possible, right? When you look at the cumulative effect of all of this inflation, how are you going to roll this back? You can't, because you don't want deflation, for goodness sakes. That's a whole other subset of factors. Reminder, go over to 76 Research, everyone, 76research.com, because we have an inflation-protected portfolio. Rob Horton, my colleague there at 76, and I have worked really hard. These are like the top 10 to 15 stocks that you need to protect yourself from all this inflation that we're dealing with. It's pretty massive. It's pretty significant. So how do you know if your investments are actually keeping pace with inflation? Get yourself the inflation-protected portfolio. We also have an American Resilience portfolio, and we have a basic sort of income generation portfolio as well. I think that these are the top 10 stocks that you need to know about in 2024. American Resilience, 10 to 15 stocks, inflation protection, and of course, the income builder. So 76research.com. That's where you're going to find it all. But anyway, like going back to this idea that they put all this inflation into the economy, and now he's not willing to take any responsibility for it whatsoever. In fact, Biden just keeps saying, we're doing better. We're doing better. I've created all these jobs. No, you haven't. I mean, look at those jobs numbers. People are working 3 or 4 jobs. Those jobs are paying less because people have to work more. Or I should say, actually, they are paying, in fairness, a little bit more per hour. But because it's not enough to keep up with inflation and nobody actually looks at real wages because they're clearly not sophisticated enough, that's a problem. That's a real problem. So that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen.